shipmates, my watchmate. Tuesday, September 8th. This was my first day's duty on board the ship, and though a sailor's life is a sailor's life wherever it may be, yet I found everything very different here from the customs of the brig Pilgrim. After all hands were called at daybreak, 3 minutes and a half were allowed for every man to dress and come on deck. And if any were longer than that, they were sure to be overhauled by the mate, who was always on deck and making himself heard all over the ship. The head pump was then rigged and the decks washed down by the second and third mates, the chief mate walking the quarterdeck and keeping a general supervision, but not deigning to touch a bucket or a brush. Inside and out, fore and aft, upper deck and between decks, steerage and forecastle, rail, bulwarks, and waterways were washed, scrubbed and scraped with brooms and canvas, and the decks were wet and sanded all over, and then holystone. The holystone is a large soft stone, smooth on the bottom, with long ropes attached to each end, by which the crew kept it sliding fore and aft over the wet, sanded decks. Smaller hand stones, which the sailors called prayer books, are used to scrub in among the crevices and narrow places where the large holystone will not go. An hour or two we were kept at this work when the head pump was manned and all the sand washed off the decks and sides. Then came swabs and squill juice, and after the decks were dry, each one went to his particular morning job. There were 5 boats belonging to the ship: launch, pinnace, jolly boat, larboard, quarter boat, and gig, each of which had a coxswain who had charge of it and was answerable for the order and cleanness of it. The rest of the cleaning was divided among the crew, one having the brass and composition work about the capstan, another the bell, which was of brass and kept as bright as a gilt button, a third the harness cask, another the man-rope stanchions, others the steps of the forecastle and hatchways, which were hauled up in holystone. Each of these jobs must be finished before breakfast, and in the meantime the rest of the crew filled the scuttlebutt, and the cook scraped his kids, wooden tubs out of which the sailors eat, and polished the hoops and placed them before the galley to await inspection. When the decks were dry, the Lord Paramount made his appearance on the quarterdeck and took a few turns when 8 bells were struck and all hands went to breakfast. Half an hour was allowed for breakfast when all hands were called again, the kids, pots, bread bags, etc. stowed away. And this morning, preparations were made for getting underway. We paid out on the chain by which we swung, hove in on the other, catted the anchor, and hove short on the first. This work was done in shorter time than was usual on board the brig, for though everything was more than twice as large and heavy, the cat block being as much as a man could lift and the chain as large as 3 of the Pilgrim, yet there was a plenty of room to move about in. More disciplined system, more men, and more goodwill. Every one seemed ambitious to do his best. Officers and men knew their duty, and all went well. As soon as she was hove short, the mate on the forecastle gave the order to loose the sails, and in an instant everyone sprung into the rigging, up the shrouds and out on the yards, scrambling by one another. First up, the best fellow cast off the yard arm gaskets and bunk gaskets, and one man remained on each yard holding the bunt jigger with a turn round the tie, all ready to let go, while the rest laid down to man the sheets and halyards. The mate then hailed the yards, all ready forward, all ready the cross-jack yards, etc., and aye, sir. Being returned from each, the word was given to let go, and in the twinkling of an eye, the ship, which had shown nothing but her bare yards, was covered with her loose canvas from the royal mastheads to the decks. Everyone then laid down except one man in each top to overhaul the rigging, and the topsails were hoisted and sheeted home, all 3 yards going to the masthead at once, the larboard watch hoisting the fore, the starboard watch the main, and 5 light hands, of whom I was one, picked from the 2 watches the mizen. The yards were then trimmed, the anchor weighed, the cat block hooked on, the fall stretched out, manned by all hands in the hook, and the anchor brought to the head with cheerily manned in full chorus. The ship being now underway, the light sails were set, one after another, and she was under full sail before she had passed the sandy point. The fore royal, which fell to my lot being in the mate's watch, was more than twice as large as that of the Pilgrim, and though I could handle the brigs easily, I found my hands full with this, especially as there were no jacks to the ship, everything being for neatness and nothing left for Jack to hold on by but his eyelids. As soon as we were beyond the point and all sail out, the order was given, go below the watch, and the crew said that ever since they had been on the coast, they had had watch and watch while going from port to port, and in fact everything showed that though strict discipline was kept, and the utmost was required of every man in the way of his duty, yet on the whole there was very good usage on board. Each one knew that he must be a man and show himself smart when at his duty, yet everyone was satisfied with the usage, and a contented crew, agreeing with one another and finding no fault, was a contrast indeed with the small, hard-used, dissatisfied, grumbling, desponding crew of the Pilgrim. It being the turn of our watch to go below, the men went to work mending their clothes and doing other little things for themselves, and I, having got my wardrobe in complete order at San Diego, had nothing to do but read. I accordingly overhauled the chests of the crew, but found nothing that suited me exactly until one of the men said he had a book which told all about a great highwayman at the bottom of his chest. In producing it, I found to my surprise and joy that it was nothing else than Bulwer's Paul Clifford. This I seized immediately, and going to my hammock, lay there swinging and reading until the watch was out. The between decks were clear, the hatchways open, and a cool breeze blowing through them, the ship under easy way, and everything comfortable. I had just got well into the story when 8 bells were struck, and we were all ordered to dinner. After dinner came our watch on deck for 4 hours, and at 4 o'clock I went below again, turned into my hammock, and read until the dog watch. As no lights were allowed after 8 o'clock, there was no reading on the night watch. Having light winds and calms, we were 3 days on the passage and each watch below during the daytime. I spent in the same manner until I had finished my book. I shall never forget the enjoyment I derived from it. To have come across anything with the slightest claims to literary merit was so unusual, and this was a perfect feast to me. The brilliancy of the book, the succession of capital hits, lively and characteristic sketches kept me in a constant state of pleasing sensations. It was far too good for a sailor. I could not expect such fine times to last long. While on deck, the regular work of the ship went on. The sailmaker and carpenter worked between decks, and the crew had their work to do upon the rigging, drawing yarns, making spun yarn, etc., as usual in merchantmen. The night watches were much more pleasant than on board the Pilgrim. There were so few in a watch that one being at the wheel and another on the lookout, there was no one left to talk with. But here, we had 7 in a watch, so that we had long yarns in abundance. After 2 or 3 night watches, I became well acquainted with all the larboard watch. The sailmaker was the head man of the watch and was generally considered the most experienced seaman on board. He was a thoroughbred old man of war's man, had been to sea 22 years in all kinds of vessels, men of war, privateers, slavers, and merchantmen, everything except whalers, which a thorough sailor despises and will always steer clear of if he can. He had, of course, been in all parts of the world and was remarkable for drawing a long bow. His yarns frequently stretched through a watch and kept all hands awake. They were always amusing from their improbability, and indeed he never expected to be believed, but spun them merely for amusement, and as he had some humor and a good supply of man-of-war slang and sailors' salt phrases, he always made fun. Next to him in age and experience, and of course in standing in the watch, was an Englishman named Harris, of whom I shall have more to say hereafter. Then came 2 or 3 Americans who had been the common run of European and South American voyages, and one who had been in a spouter, and of course had all the whaling stories to himself. Last of all was a broad-backed, thick-headed boy from Cape Cod, who had been in mackerel schooners and was making his first voyage in a square-rigged vessel. He was born in Hingham and of course was called Bucket Maker. The other watch was composed of about the same number, a tall, fine-looking Frenchman with coal-black whiskers and curly hair, a first-rate seaman and named John. One name is enough for a sailor, was the head man of the watch. Then came 2 Americans, one of whom had been a dissipated young man of property and family, who was reduced to duck trousers and monthly wages. A German and English lad named Ben, who belonged on the mizzen topsail yard with me and was a good sailor for his years. And 2 Boston boys just from the public schools. The carpenter sometimes mustered in the starboard watch and was an old sea dog, a Swede by birth, and accounted the best helmsman in the ship. This was our ship's company beside the cook and steward, who were blacks, 3 mates, and the captain. The second day out, the wind drew ahead and we had to beat up the coast so that in tacking ship I could see the regulations of the vessel. Instead of going wherever was most convenient and running from place to place wherever work was to be done, each man had his station. A regular tacking and wearing bill was made out. The chief mate commanded on the forecastle and had charge of the head sails and the forward part of the ship. 2 of the best men in the ship, the sailmaker from our watch and John, the Frenchman from the other, worked the forecastle. The 3rd mate commanded in the waist, and with the carpenter and 1 man worked the main tack and bow lines. The cook, ex officio, the foresheet, and the steward, the main. The 2nd mate had charge of the after yards and let go the lee fore and main braces. I was stationed at the weather cross jack braces, 3 other light hands at the lee, 1 boy at the spanker sheet, and Guy, a man and a boy at the main topsail, top gallant and royal braces, and all the rest of the crew, men and boys, tallied on to the main brace. Everyone here knew his station, must be there when all hands were called to put the ship about, and was answerable for every rope committed to him. Each man's rope must be let go and hauled in at the order, properly made fast and neatly coiled away when the ship was about. As soon as all hands are at their stations, the captain, who stands on the weather side of the quarterdeck, makes a sign to the man at the wheel to put it down and calls out, "Helms a-lee, helms a-lee." "Helms a-lee," answers the mate on the forecastle, and the head sheets are let go. "Raise tacks and sheets," says the captain. Tacks and sheets is passed forward, and the foretack and main sheet are let go. The next thing is to haul taut for a swing. The weather cross jack braces and the lee main braces are each belayed together upon 2 pins and ready to be let go, and the opposite brace is hauled taut. "Main topsail haul," shouts the captain. The braces are let go, and if he has taken his time well, the yards swing round like a top. But if he is too late or too soon, it is like drawing teeth. The after yards are then braced up and belayed, the main sheet hauled aft, the spanker eased over to leeward, and the men from the braces send the head yards. "Let go and haul," says the captain. The 2nd mate lets go the weather fore braces, and the men haul into leeward. The mate on the forecastle looks out for the head yards. "Well, the fore topsail yard. Top gallant yards well, royal yards too much, haul into windward. So, well that, well all." Then the starboard watch board the main tack, and the larboard watch lay forward and board the foretack and haul down the jib sheet, clapping a tackle upon it if it blows very fresh. The after yards are then trimmed, the captain generally looking out for them himself. "Well, the cross jack yard. Small pull the main top gallant yard. Well that, well the mizzen top gallant yard. Cross jack yards all well. Well all aft, all taut to windward. Everything being now trimmed and in order, each man coils up the rigging at his own station, and the order is given, go below the watch. During the last 24 hours of the passage, we beat off and on the land, making a tack about once in 4 hours, so that I had a sufficient opportunity to observe the working of the ship. And certainly it took more men to brace about this ship's lower yards, which were more than 50 feet square, than it did those of the Pilgrim, which were not much more than half the size. So much depends upon the manner in which the braces run and the state of the blocks, and Captain Wilson of the Ayacucho, who was afterwards a passenger with us upon a trip to windward, said he had no doubt that our ship worked 2 men lighter than his brig. Friday, September 11th. This morning at 4 o'clock went below San Pedro Point, being about 2 leagues ahead, and the ship going on under studding sails. In about an hour we were waked up by the hauling of the chain about decks, and in a few minutes all hands ahoy was called, and we were all at work. Hauling in and making up the studding sails, overhauling the chain forward and getting the anchors ready. The Pilgrim is there at anchor, said someone, as we were running about decks, and taking a moment's look over the rail, I saw my old friend deeply laden, lying at anchor inside of the kelp. In coming to anchor as well as in tacking, each one had his station and duty. The light sails were clewed up and furled, the courses hauled up and the jibs down, then came the topsails and the buntlines, and the anchor let go. As soon as she was well at anchor, all hands lay aloft to furl the topsails, and this I soon found was a great matter on board this ship, for every sailor knows that a vessel is judged of a good deal by the furl of her sails. The third mate, a sailmaker, in the larboard watch went upon the fore topsail yard. The second mate, carpenter, in the starboard watch upon the main, and myself and the English lad and the 2 Boston boys and the young Cape Cod man furled the mizzen topsail. This sail belonged to us altogether, to reef and to furl, and not a man was allowed to come upon our yard. The mate took us under his special care, frequently making us furl the sail over 3 or 4 times until we got the bunt up to a perfect cone, and the whole sail without a wrinkle. As soon as each sail was hauled up and the bunt made, the jigger was bent onto the slack of the bunt lines, and the bunt triced up on deck. The mate then took his place between the night heads to twig the fore, on the windlass to twig the main, and at the foot of the mainmast for the mizzen. And if anything was wrong, too much bunt on one side, clews too taut, too slack, or any sail abaft the yard, the whole must be dropped again. When all was right, the bunts were triced well up, the yard arm gaskets passed, so as not to leave a wrinkle forward of the yard, short gaskets with turns close together. From the moment of letting go the anchor, when the captain ceases his care of things, the chief mate is a great man with a voice like a young lion. He was hallooing and bawling in all directions, making everything fly, and at the same time doing everything well. He was quite a contrast to the worthy, quiet, unobtrusive mate of the Pilgrim, not so estimable a man, perhaps, but a far better mate of a vessel, and the entire change in Captain T's conduct since he took command of the ship was owing, no doubt, in a great measure to this fact. If the chief officer wants force, discipline slackens, everything gets out of joint, the captain interferes continually. That makes a difficulty between them, which encourages the crew, and the whole ends in a 3-sided quarrel. But Mr. Brown, the mate of the Alert, wanted no help from anybody, took everything into his own hands, and was more likely to encroach upon the authority of the master than to need any spurring. Captain T gave his directions to the mate in private, and except in coming to anchor, getting underway, tacking, reefing topsails, and other all-hands work, seldom appeared in person. This is the proper state of things, and while this lasts and there is a good understanding aft, everything will go on well.